So we're on week 6. It's been so much fun over these previous 5 weeks to explore in Revelation 2 and 3 how, as Jesus says, I know you and I know where you live. It's been so striking. I don't know whether you found this, but the level of detail that Jesus employs in these messages, right? Just think back to how Jesus, he maps out their reality. Not just their hearts, where they live, their unique history, their geography, their geology, their culture, their industry, their architecture. And then he uses all of that knowledge to then speak his sword word. And why does he do that? Jesus is wanting to tell them and tell us he knows everything about us. It's been so wonderful to be reminded over these few weeks that Jesus uses his perfect knowledge to these 7 churches and to us to speak personally to us in the exact way we need to hear. And that's going to happen this morning. Jesus is going to speak to you in the exact way you need to hear. He knows everything about your life. He's going to encourage you this morning. He's going to challenge you this morning. He's going to invite you to a whole new world. Okay, Jesus has spoken to 5 churches already. And now his blazing eyes turn to the church in Philadelphia. Philadelphia are this really, really small church. They don't look very impressive if we were to judge impressiveness by numbers. They're a small community of believers whose lives are daily shaken. So, what does Jesus say to these followers and to us when we're in troubling circumstances such as this? Okay, we're going to look at Revelation chapter 3, verses 7 to 13. So if you've got a Bible near you or a phone, feel free to open it. But again, the scriptures will be on the screen here. Here we go. Jesus' message to Philadelphia. To the angel of the church in Philadelphia, write, these are the words of him who is holy and true, who holds the key of David. What he opens, no one can shut, and what he shuts, no one can open. I know your deeds. See, I have placed before you an open door that no one can shut. I know that you have little strength. Yet you have kept my word and have not denied my name. I will make those who are of the synagogue of Satan, who claim to be Jews though they are not, but are liars, I will make them come and fall down at your feet and acknowledge that I have loved you. Since you've kept my command to endure patiently, I will also keep you from the hour of trial that's going to come on the whole world to test the inhabitants of the earth. I am coming soon. Hold on to what you have so that no one will take your crown. To the one who is victorious, I will make a pillar in the temple of my God. Never again will they leave it. I will write on them the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, the new Jerusalem that is coming out of heaven from my God. And I will also write on them my new name. Whoever has ears, let them hear what the Spirit says to the churches. Okay. In a moment, we're going to look at explicitly what Jesus is saying here. And I think as we're hearing it, we might be thinking, there's lots of things that Jesus is saying that I don't so readily recognize or can understand. But this is, I would say, the most encouraging and comforting of all the messages. It's wonderful. It's a healing balm for our souls. So, as I say, in a moment, I want to talk about what Jesus explicitly says. So we will go through what he's going to say. But for a minute, I just want to talk about some of the allusions that Jesus is referencing to, highlighting, that are in the background, that as soon as the church in Philadelphia would have heard, they immediately know, because it's their life, it's their lived experience. We're 2,000 years on in another country. those allusions don't immediately kind of pop, do they? So here we go. There's three things that I want to look at that Jesus is referencing that will help us understand why he is saying what he's saying. Here we go. So, first thing, Jesus makes an allusion to the city's threefold name and identity. Again, we might not pick it up in the passage, but we will do it in time. So here's a bit of history. The city of Philadelphia was founded by the Greek king called Eumenes II in 189 BC. He was later this ailing king, and his brother was so loyal and supportive that he decided to honor this new city that he founded in honor of his brother, who he had nicknamed Philadelphus, meaning the lover of a brother. So he named this new city after his brother. Over a century later, there's a second name. Philadelphia took on this additional name due to this appreciation of Emperor Tiberius. They'd gone through this ordeal, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. And Tiberius was really helpful. He assisted the city, and so the city named itself after Caesar, calling itself Neo Caesarea, New Caesar. And then 75 years from that, the city adopted the family name of another emperor, Emperor Vespasian, calling itself Philadelphia Flavia. So basically, this city is devoted to its kings and emperors along the way, okay? All right, so that's kind of the first thing in the background. It's threefold name. Jesus is going to reference this. So the second thing is Jesus draws attention to how Philadelphia, 60 years earlier from the message, suffered a massive earthquake. The ornate temples and pillars and statues and even their homes came crashing down. And so, hence why the city showed appreciation to the emperor, because the emperor Tiberius helped rebuild the city, and even for 5 years paused them having to pay taxes. So they were like, well, thank you so much. We'll name the city the New Caesar. Even after that massive earthquake, the city continually experiences aftershocks. And there's the history of how the city was always, you could see cracks continually emerging in the architecture. The city was constantly suffering damage. Okay, that's two things in the background. The last thing. The majority of the population decided to move out of the city and move into the countryside. So if you were to go into the city at the time, there's only a few people, there's only a few communities living there. Most people are outside in the countryside. And initially, it's a really prosperous thing because what they found out in the country was this large deposit of lava, which was perfect for growing grapes, for vineyards. And so it created this really prosperous industry in the area. Fantastic. But only a few years before Revelation, this whole letter we have, it all changed because then the current emperor, Emperor Domitian, decided to put sanctions. He imposed sanctions to halve the output of all grape-growing industry in the empire, and he wanted to focus on growing corn to feed his armies. This was devastating for Philadelphia. They've moved out of their city, and it once was prosperous. Now it's economic disaster. Now, you see Jesus, this is all in the background. He's weaving this in his message. And you get a sense that he really knows them, and he knows the state of their lives. Let me just list some of the things that he knows they're going through. They've been dispossessed of their native land. They've had to leave homes and their community. They're outsiders of a broken city. They're residents of an unstable ground. Wherever they go, they don't know if it's going to start moving. They're financially unstable. They're nervous of the future. They've been betrayed by the emperor to whom the city bears its name and allegiance. And to make matters worse, and you probably detected this in the message, Jesus, he's aware that this local community of Jews, this synagogue, are slandering and intimidating them again. That happened to Sardis, if you remember. Because this community is saying that these Christians are illegitimate. They're outsiders. They're false, following a false Messiah. For the church in Philadelphia, the tremors of life don't stop. They keep rumbling. Their life is one after another, pain after pain. Now, suddenly, this message to Jesus is so powerful because he's speaking to those of us whose life feels like one quake after another, which may be for us right now the very experience we're in right now. The ground we're standing on seems so unstable, so unsteady, or it may be the experience we've had for as long as we can remember. What could some of those things be? Bereavement, betrayal, a tragic diagnosis, the loss of a job, hopes deferred. How does Jesus address those whose life is in a situation like that? Well, one thing to say from the outset before we actually look into what Jesus says is that he has no word of rebuke. There's no critique or admonishment. He places no blame or no fault for those who live on the fault line. Now, that might sound obvious, of course. Why would Jesus want to do that? But I don't think it always is obvious. I don't think it is, we don't feel it to be obvious. Because I think in our trying seasons, sometimes that we can live in a place of shame, believing that in our tough times, we're failing to follow Jesus appropriately. We're failing to follow Jesus victoriously. Or we live in a place of guilt. We believe that somehow it's our fault, that we're reaping the consequence of some hidden offense along the way. Does that resonate? Does that make sense? In our trying times, we can blame ourselves for either not doing something or for doing something. That's not how Jesus interprets our situation. He is silent. And his silence quiets our sense of shame and guilt in his loving presence. He looks at us lovingly with his eyes ablaze, with no word of correction or admonishment in our tough times. And we suddenly find our lives being able to open up, and we're able to offer ourselves before him, the entirety of our lives and our situation, to him with honesty. There's no hiding, no pushing down. We can bear our lives openly to the one who sees all. But we don't just live honestly to Jesus, who is with us in our trying times. We can live hopefully. Because what Jesus has got to say to us, he's going to speak a word that can shake us to the core and provide us with a steady step on the way to God's new world. So we're going to look right now at what Jesus explicitly says. We've seen what he doesn't say. We're now going to see what he does say. And then after that, we're going to look at how Jesus is now speaking to us. So if we turn to verse 7, we're going to see that Jesus begins like he's done with all the messages. He starts by identifying himself in a way that the particular church just needs to hear. And what he describes himself as is as the holy and true one. These are titles that are commonly described to God in the Old Testament. And Jesus describes himself as the holy and true because what Jesus wants to address first of all is these accusations. That's what Jesus goes for first. These accusations from some of the members of the local Jewish synagogue. Do you remember they claim that the church, who are likely made up also of Jewish Christians, that they're fraudulent, they're locked outside of God's people, they're following a false Messiah. Well, Jesus reveals to Philadelphia that these accusations are false and malicious. They're motivated by the enemy. And this synagogue, Jesus says, are not qualified to judge them. Only he is, as the holy and true one, the Lord and Messiah. And Jesus is throughout this message, is going to redefine how the church sees themselves. Because they see themselves as with little strength, small, they're intimidated. Jesus is going to lift their sights to see who they are afresh. And Jesus declares that the church in Philadelphia are not outsiders to their community. They are not outsiders to God's people. They are not outsiders to God's presence. Rather, they are royal insiders because he has the key of David. The key of David, that sounds fun, doesn't it? Now, what is the key of David? It's actually a reference to Isaiah 22, verses 22 to 40. It recalls a very specific moment in Israel's history, a troubled time at the time of King Hezekiah. And Isaiah shares God's word to say that Hezekiah's chief of staff, an unfaithful man called Shebna, he's going to be removed from his post and replaced by a godly man called Eliakim. Eliakim would receive from God this key of David, with the authority to, as the doorkeeper, to protect and provide entrance into the royal dwelling, into the palace. That's not immediately obvious to us, but Jesus is drawing attention to this past event to say that he now holds the key. He is the ultimate gatekeeper. As Paul said, he is the door for God's people to enter into God's royal dwelling. So the church in Philadelphia, who are being slandered as outside, locked out of God's presence, Jesus says, they don't have authority to say such a thing. I'm the doorkeeper. It's wide open. No one's going to shut the door. They have total access, permanent access to God's presence now and forever. And it's not something they even need to work hard for, because through Jesus, the door is wide open for them to continually enjoy the one on the throne. So this church in Philadelphia who are broken and dejected, Jesus is saying, you're incredible. And you have total access to my Father's presence. And that must have been so encouraging for this church of little strength, as Jesus says. Again, to all appearances, they are small, they're unimpressive. You know, there's estimates that they might have been a community of about 20 people. These aren't, think of, it was at Sardis last week. Jesus says, you have a reputation for being alive. Wow. These churches don't seem to have a reputation of being alive, do they? And again, they're constantly shaken daily. You know, where they're living doesn't seem especially prosperous or life-giving. And yet Jesus says, after everything you've faced, you've not denied my name, and you've kept my word. You're the holy and true ones too. You're like me. They're the ones who are alive. And Jesus is going to say, you might feel at your absolute lowest, but one day I'm going to take you to the highest. He says, one day your faithfulness to me will be honored by everyone. We sung this song, All Hail King Jesus. The return of Jesus is seen as that very moment where all creation suddenly drops and bows the knee. All hail King Jesus. But Jesus says that's not the only person who's hailed. It's also his followers. There is a day of vindication coming where the whole world will announce and realize that we were right all along. Told you so. And Jesus is actually saying that to this Jewish community. You're going to say one day, you were right. We were wrong. We were wrong in rejecting this community of followers of the Messiah. And Jesus is actually drawing to a very specific passage again, and it's in Isaiah. And you can look it up at some point. Isaiah 60, verses 14. It speaks of the end when the hostile nations would come and enter God's city and bow down to Israel, acknowledging they were right all along in worshiping the one true God. But by Jesus reapplying this message, he's saying this Jewish community are going to join those hostile nations at the end, and they're going to be numbered amongst them. And together they will acknowledge that Jesus has always loved this church in Philadelphia. It's fascinating. It's a fascinating idea, isn't it? And we're going to receive that as well. There's going to be a moment, this day of vindication, when those who have maybe hurt us or rejected our witness, will acknowledge that, well, you were right all along. And it's a day, Revelation suggests, is both Jesus' double-edged wielding of judgment, but also surprising salvation for the nations. It's going to be a day of salvation. It's going to be a remarkable day. Jesus then goes on to say that the church will not only be honored at the end, they will also be kept from the hour of trouble that's coming upon the world, or that will be in the world. It sounds like... well, there's a whole range of things that it sounds like it could be, but you see again and again in Revelation that Jesus is talking about a trial upon the world. He's talking about, or another phrase is the Great Tribulation, which suddenly for some of us here might get us all nervous. But in Revelation, there's a whole manner of ways basically this present age, life as we know it, is described. It's described as a great tribulation. It's described as 3.5 years. It's described as 1,260 days. Simply put, it's an era. It's life as we know it when it's difficult, when there's suffering, hostility. It's what we see on the news. It's when it's experience of trial and testing. But it's also a period in which the allegiance of our hearts is made known. We're tested and pushed. Where are you going to run to? What foundation are you going to build? That's what this life is about. But it's a time in which the Holy Spirit empowers God's people to be faithful. And then it reaches its culmination when Jesus returns and God is going to judge human evil. And Jesus says, after everything that you've gone through, and when you're finally standing before the Lord, you can stand. You can be confident. You've come through the door. You can be at peace. You've got nothing to worry about. I am keeping you to the very end. And indeed, they are going to receive a crown, which is actually an athletics, like victor's wreath, because they finished the race. They kept the faith. Not only that, they're going to be pillars in God's new temple, right? Remember, they're living in an environment where there's been earthquakes, everything's come crashing down. They're going to be God's vital. They're going to play a vital part in God's new world. They're going to live secure, steady, strong, stable. The ground isn't going to start moving. They're going to be at rest and at peace in God's manifest presence. That's the new heavens, the new earth. And they will never have to leave the city, Jesus says, like they had to do in their day, going out into the countryside. They'll never have to leave because they can rest secure in God's presence. And they will reside there forever, redefining their citizenship because they're residents of a new city with a threefold name. The city of God, the city of the Father, the city of the Son, do my fingers, and the new Jerusalem. Not New Caesar, the New Jerusalem. It's a city, Jesus says it's named by him, the true king, who's never going to betray the lover of a brother. Can you see how Jesus is weaving his knowledge? I know you and I know where you live. And he completely redefines it for people whose lives are shaken daily to say, I am for you. I am with you all the way to the very end. Can you see how Jesus' message to Philadelphia, how he relates tenderly to those of us with little strength? He is silent with any critique. So no shame or guilt needs to accompany our troubling circumstances. None whatsoever. And he's vocal with encouragement to us. Jesus speaks aloud our identity, our true identity in life, in this present age of trial, as royal insiders, holy and true, his marvelous, faithful, and secure people. He cheers us on to keep walking patiently with him, one step after another to the very end, as he keeps us through the hour of trial. And we see in this message, he takes us to the future. He's done that for every church. If you've noticed, at the end of every message, he says, this is what your life will be. he offers a breathtaking glimpse of their destiny. And can you see how he talks about what their life is like now, but then the future reverses it, or it heals it. Jesus is saying their deepest longings and yearnings in their heart, Jesus is going to meet. He's going to meet fully at the very end. And it's that future that's supposed to break in and change how we see our life right now. Now that's the very thing that the Apostle Paul says in 2 Corinthians 4:17. We'll recognize this. We do not lose heart. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but what is unseen, since what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. I love how Jesus tells us and tells this community who are really struggling in life that their future is so wonderful. It will heal every ache and yearning in their heart. It's one thing to be told that. It's another thing to experience it. And if you notice at the end of every letter, every message, Jesus says, he who has an ear, let him hear what the Spirit says to the churches. The Spirit is a foretaste of the age to come. We have that. And I think after everything Jesus says, he ends by saying, and now's the time to be receptive, to have ears, to listen, to receive everything I've said to you, to encounter what I've said to you, to enliven everything I've said to you so that you can feel it and know it in your bones. That's what Jesus is offering us, not just information about the future, an actual experience, a taste of the power of the age to come. And by receiving and encountering the Holy Spirit in these words of Jesus, we just feel the overwhelming reality of our new identity and our new destiny at home in the city of God.